This webinar will describe the particular challenges and opportunities of teaching sustainability at community colleges. SCC Advisory Board member Krista Hiser will present a sneak preview of the forthcoming Community College Handbook for Sustainability Education and Operations, followed by Q&A with our two special guests, Bob Franco, who is the President-elect of the Community College Alliance for Sustainability, also known as CCASE, and Michelle Wyman, who is the Executive Director of the National Council for Science and Environment, NCSE. The takeaways from this webinar will include online resources, support, and an understanding of the role of community colleges in sustainability. I hope the presenters will elaborate on my all too brief introduction. They each bring a lot to the table and have vast experience in this space, and we're lucky to have all three of them together on the line today. I thank Dr. Krista Hiser for arranging to have our guests, Bob Franco and Michelle Wyman, here today. And with that, Krista, if you're ready to go, I'm going to allow you to begin your presentation. Krista, all set?
Thank you, Ira. All set. Oh. All right. Well, aloha, everybody, and good morning from Kapi'olani Community College in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'll tell you a little bit about the agenda for today's webinar. We're developing a handbook. It's in conjunction with the National Council for Science and the Environment and the Community College Alliance for Sustainability Education. And this handbook addresses a gap in the literature and the conversation about the particular role of community colleges in implementing sustainability in higher education. So we're going to start out with a sneak preview of the contents of this handbook. We'll talk about some of the things that are unique about community colleges and sustainability. This includes both challenges as well as opportunities and the special role of community colleges in all aspects, from operations to applied learning to community engagement and, of course, curriculum. So we'll give you an overview of the chapters for the handbook. We'll talk about how this project is being uniquely developed. I'm the co-editor for the handbook with my colleague Francisco Acoba, and it's a very unique collaborative writing endeavor. I'll introduce the lead authors for each chapter and share with you, if you have something to contribute to this handbook, share with you how we're developing it. And then we'll have an update from NCSE Executive Director Michelle Wyman and from CCASE President-elect Bob Franco, who is here with me right now. I believe we'll also have a couple of the chapter authors on the call at the end of today's webinar, and we'll open it up for some Q&A about the handbook, the chapters in the handbook, and the partnership between CCASE and NCSE. We will also invite you to join us and be part of the iterative process of developing this handbook at the NCSE meeting in Washington, D.C. Here's the theme of this year's meeting. So at the January meeting, we'll have a special working session with drafts of each of these chapters and be inviting ongoing input onto the development of those chapters. The handbook is really intended to be a practical, hands-on working document that includes case studies from community colleges that are doing really extraordinary work in implementing sustainability, as well as being honest about some of the challenges and the unique needs of community colleges. So I'm going to start with the results of a brainstorming session. There was a group of CCASE membership. We were at the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences meeting, and we had a full day. I called it the C-Case lock-in. We spent 8 hours in a room developing the content for this handbook. And as the editor for the project, it was quite fascinating to manage that process. So we started out by talking about what is unique about community colleges when it comes to sustainability. So here's that sneak preview. One is the unique relationship that, yep, sorry.
I don't believe your slides are advancing.
Oh, shoots. You didn't see the NCSE slide?
Nope.
And you don't see the community
now
industry?
It is.
Now it is. Okay, I'm going to not use the arrow then.
Why don't you go back briefly to the NCSE slide so that folks can see what you were talking about? There it is. That's the conference that's coming up in January. And now I think you're safe to proceed. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ira. So one thing, there were 5 points about some of the unique aspects of sustainability in community colleges. And one is the unique relationship community colleges have with industry as well as with local governments. The second is the opportunities for partnerships between technical schools and four-year institutions, which can result in effective innovation and research models. I chose this image of air conditioners. This image is from the book Drawdown, which mentions refrigeration as the #1 carbon mitigation strategy. And at the recent ASHE meeting, Daryl was talking about the role of community colleges in addressing training in HVAC programs. So that's just one example of the kind of direct impact that community colleges can have on training for industry. The third point about what's unique about community colleges is that the students at community colleges come from that community and plan to live in that community. So they really have a stake in the community's livability, which drives meaningful community engagement. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes community colleges can be more responsive to workforce and can develop programs of study with a little bit greater agility. They can be a little more nimble and responsive to employer needs. And then the last point that we discussed about community colleges is that the open access nature of community colleges really brings a diversity of ethnicity, socioeconomic status, background, and this is ideal for interacting with complex problem solving and connecting sustainability and social justice. So these points form the preface of the handbook, and that preface was drafted by Resham Shirshat. So just an example of the folks who are driving each of the chapters. Resham is the Director for Sustainability at Valencia Community College. They're one of the founding C-Case member schools. These are some of the community colleges that belong to C-Case. So what I'd like to do now is give you that sneak preview about the chapters that are being developed for this handbook. And I'll go back and forth with Bob talking about these chapters. So the first chapter, chapter 1, focuses on campus operations. And I'm going to let Bob share some of the key points about this chapter, which has been developed by Stephen Summers. He's the current president of the Community College Alliance for Sustainability Education. So Bob, can you tell us a little about chapter 1?
I'd be happy to. Aloha, I'm Bob Franco. I'm the director of the Office for Institutional Effectiveness at Kapi'olani Community College. So I work closely with Krista, but also have a sort of focus on, is the institution being effective in the way it teaches sustainability, particularly in an island environment that's already seeing the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. Stephen's chapter is about sustainability and campus operations, and he develops a really interesting idea that our campuses are really mini cities. We have footprints that include multiple buildings, classrooms, laboratories, training facilities, office spaces, performance spaces, food services, and occasionally residential spaces. He talks about the energy intensiveness of our campuses, and that if we address some of our energy usages, it can be a financial boon to the college as well as an inspiration to the local community. So his paper talks about how if the campus is an exemplar of good sustainability operational practices, there'll be budget savings, reductions in greenhouse gases, and even going so far as to develop disaster and resilience plans for the campus. Having done this, campuses then are able to become models for the wider community, and there can be kind of open door conversation with the community. The community can see that the campus itself is being energy efficient and adapting to current challenges. So I think this idea of a mini city is a really good idea. We're moving on some of that ourselves so that people in the community can come to campus and see what we're doing and things they can then use in their community. So this sort of fluidity or openness between the community colleges and the wider community is emphasized in Stephen's paper.
And as the editor on this project, I have to say that Stephen is a wonderful writer, and he's working with folks in his network to include examples not only from Seminole State in Florida, but from other colleges as well. So if people have examples or questions or something to contribute to this chapter, Stephen is working with other contributing authors to develop that. I'll speak now about chapter 2, which has been written by Maria Bocalandro. She's with Cedar Valley Community College in Dallas. And Dallas has a really strong kind of system network for their community colleges. Chapter 2 focuses on applied learning. This is that idea of campus as a living learning laboratory. This chapter includes a lot of really compelling examples that are honest about successes and struggles in implementing this type of applied learning on campus. The points that come out in the chapter are that it's very important that living lab projects have strong communication, that students are involved, that there is a collaboration that you think about ahead of time with facilities, administration, faculty, staff, even human resources. Ways to plan out the funding. If you cannot think through the budget all the way from the beginning, it's very hard to finish and sustain the project. How do we maintain these projects once they're installed? How do we market and promote them? The chapter talks about lessons about how to engage with community partners on these projects and how to leverage partnerships in order to get really cool stuff done on your campus. So what I like about chapter 2 is that it's full of examples. It's really cool. And I know that Maria has reached out to many colleges and colleagues within her network to contribute to those lessons. And again, really be honest about what it's like to implement an applied learning project, campus as a living lab.
Just one quick addition here. I really think this language of moving from projects to programs is important. I think a lot of innovation occurs and there's a lot of disparate efforts on campuses and projects that are exciting. People are doing meaningful things, but oftentimes these things sort of run out of gas unless they're part of a more synergized program on campus. So this is an area where whenever there's innovation in community colleges, I worry about how do we move from projects to sort of sustained programming. And so I think that's an area that CCASE will be pursuing in the next year or two.
Great point. Thank you, Bob. I'm going to move on to chapter 3. This is the chapter that's very close to my own heart and the mission of the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium. Nancy Lee Wood from Bristol Community College has drafted, I think, an amazing chapter that really talks about ways to develop a sustainability curriculum. How do we know what's being taught? So she talks about 4 ways that this can be done. One is developing modules that can be inserted into courses. That's probably the shallowest model. One is the sustainability across the curriculum sort of infusion model. One is developing new courses, and one is developing new programs. And then she talks about how each of those has been implemented at her college, Bristol Community College, as well as examples from other folks in her network. So Nancy's written a wonderful chapter that talks about some of the challenges in developing a robust and coherent sustainability curriculum. What's really important about developing sustainability curriculum is that it has some coherence to it. If we don't do this well, we can create a fragmented or contradictory experience for students, which can lead to this cognitive dissonance or to creating early cynics, things like this. It's really important we learn to do this well, and this chapter addresses how to do that honestly from a community college perspective. Bob, you want to add?
Yeah, I just think this being chapter 3, it really follows on my earlier point. Bristol Community Colleges has moved over time to really create a coherent program around sustainability teaching and learning. And I think Krista mentioned that earlier, and I think it's important. We want to talk about sustainability programs done well and raise the bar on what does that mean? What does done well mean? And as we move towards the assessment chapter, we will be considering that question of doing it well.
Yes, and as again, from the perspective of editing this project, I also have to say that Nancy is a wonderful writer, and this whole project is really a great example of practitioner research and scholarship from working scholars in the community colleges. So it's a really well done chapter. Chapter 4 actually grew out of chapter 3. Stephanie Priscilla, who's the sustainability coordinator at Moraine Valley Community College in Illinois, submitted such a substantive portion to chapter 3, talking about how do you develop your faculty to develop that curriculum. And it was so robust that immediately Francisco and I decided it must be its own chapter. Moraine Valley Community College is one of the 13, soon to be 14, regional centers for sustainability curriculum professional development. This is an approach that ASHE has taken to create these regional hubs for training faculty. So there are issues that exist, like if you have a sustainability course, what are the MQs to teach a course in sustainability? What level of professional development is required in order for a faculty teaching a course in any discipline to really effectively redesign that course for sustainability? And how do you develop your faculty with shared definitions, what sustainability means in the context of your community college? So the ASHE regional centers play a big role in that. What's unique about the way Moraine Valley is doing this is that they offer that online. So Stephanie's chapter talks about the development of these programs and the sustainability curriculum development. The next chapter I'll let Bob talk about. This focuses on sustainability. There's this phrase that people say, I don't know who said this originally, measure what matters.
Mhm.
And then we've added in sustainability, everything matters. So how do you assess these projects? Bob?
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, Francisco and Krista and I, over the last 4 or 5 years, have done a lot of work around assessment of civic and moral responsibility from a Teagle Foundation grant we had that focused on our commitments to civic and moral responsibility to healthy and sustainable communities. And we've developed a website from that Teagle grant called Teaching to Big Questions. So you could go to that website and see what we did as a result of the 3-year Teagle project. And we're adapting much of that to the institutional effort at the college to assess sustainability. So this chapter sort of talks about, you know, the role of community colleges, both in terms of liberal arts transfer and in terms of career and technical education degrees. I think one of the strengths of CCASE being a member institution with the National Council for Science and Environment is we have access to the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors, and we're trying to build that transfer bridge between community colleges and 4-year institutions. And we frame this around the idea that oftentimes 2-year and 4-year universities really share the same ecosystem. So sort of taking Stephen's idea about a mini city and expanding it, that, you know, in our case, there's a research university just 2 or 3 miles from here, and we do share watersheds and coastal environments and agricultural systems, and certainly river watersheds and things like that. So beginning to think of the 2+4, the community college to 4-year transfer bridge from the standpoint of sharing a similar ecosystem. And so what programs what courses do we need to develop? How do our students then transfer to the research university or to other 4-year campuses and continue their studying of sustainability and resilience, and then move maybe into more of a research perspective at the 4-year campuses? So we're a liberal arts transfer and career and technical education college. The other part that Kapi'olani usually speaks to very firmly is that we have a role in preparing future citizens and citizens who are engaged in democratic systems locally and nationally. At the same time, we're also preparing collaborators in a rapidly developing global system. And so we at Kapi'olani take on that additional sort of civic role in terms of preparing our future citizens for the challenges that will confront them from climate change and other impacts. So this chapter really looks at our KELA model. It looks at engagement, learning, and achievement. And we have quantitative measures in achievement, which you can see on the slide. Our engagement research is focused on our SESI, or Community College Survey of Student Engagement measures. And then the learning circle there is really a faculty community of practice who's looking at student reflection essays and scoring them using the AAC&U value rubrics. Yeah.
Bob, it was interesting what you said when we were talking yesterday about the SESI measure on effort.
Student effort.
Could you talk a little bit about how sustainability can address that measure?
Well, it goes back to your point about, you know, the students that come to the campus are from the local community, are going to go back into that community, and will have a lifetime of concern about livability in that community. So there's this kind of a sharp focus on relevance and context in sustainability education, because our students are going to go back, and these issues will need to be confronted either through economic systems or political systems. But one of the things we see nationally in the SESI data is a troubling downward trend in the student effort benchmark. And I think that the sustainability curriculum and sustainability programming generally, that would include campus as living laboratory, as well as community engagement efforts, these can really motivate students to put forth better effort. And if they can see curricular pathways to the university or into the workforce, I think we might be able to turn that trend line around. And I think that I've been an advocate for for more engaging pedagogy so that students see relevance and context in their learning, and that they then put forward the necessary effort to succeed in an academically challenging environment. So I think this is a big question. I think this is a research question a lot of community colleges could work on.
I always try to connect sustainability to that effort, the engagement, our concerns around enrollment, retention, persistence. I really believe that sustainability addresses each of those areas that are of such concern at every community college that I work with. Chapter 6, Bob will also share a few points. It's been drafted by Keith Baker of Northlake Community College, again, part of the Dallas Community College District. And Bob, a couple of Keith's points there?
Yeah, I just, in an attempt to, and it's helpful that Krista and Francisco, the editors of this volume, are on campus, so we can think about the thematic linkages between chapters. So as we move towards the concluding chapter, the weavings between the chapters are evident to the readers. At the end of chapter 5, I do a piece on community and civic engagement using the Carnegie community engagement classification language, so the larger framework nationally around campus and community partnerships. I think that will flow nicely into Keith's chapter 6, which is building an ecosystem of effective institutional partnerships. Keith, I think, is an accounting professor at Northlake College, and he talks about the importance of the workforce partnerships that we need. He talks about how workforce partnerships can result in funding for state-of-the-art technology that modern businesses need to have our students familiarized with. So there's a sort of practical aspect of building this partnership with community so that we might keep abreast of the rapidly changing technologies that our students are going to have to be familiar with when they leave us. He has a very interesting discussion of sustainability standards and sustainability reporting and how those are now being integrated into the accounting curriculum, that accountants are now more and more responsible, particularly say in the real estate area, for knowing what the sustainability standards and reporting requirements are. And so I think he's got a very sort of specific focus on sustainability in the accounting curriculum, but also a more broad focus on how he's building partnerships out in industry around those accounting roles. There are also a number of case studies that have been submitted from Iowa Community Colleges, Mount Wachusett in Massachusetts, John Wood Community College in Illinois, Cape Cod Community College in Massachusetts, Greenfield Community College in Massachusetts, and Northlake College in Irving, Texas, around partnerships for transportation. So we've got a handbook or guidebook we're developing, but it seems to also be attracting these smaller little case studies from other campuses, and we'll probably be featuring those case studies on the CCASE website. Mm-hmm. We might call them CCASE studies, by the way. Anyway, so that's Keith's chapter. We're going back to the authors now for refinement of those chapters.
Yes, and Keith is a very thorough researcher. It's a very comprehensive chapter. So the last chapter that we'll talk about today is being written by Daryl Gordon, again, with input from supporting authors in his network. Daryl, this is a picture of Daryl and I at the recent ASHE conference, and a lot of the authors for these chapters were there at the ASHE conference, holding the community of community college sustainability practitioners inside of ASHE. You want to share a couple points from Daryl's chapter?
Yeah, I think Daryl's chapter is, it was just interesting because Kapi'olani and Seminole State are doing some work around with National Science Foundation funding. Seminole State College has a grant called Emerge, establishing a means for effective renewable green energy, and it focuses on strengthening the employability for graduates by embedding a certificate within their School of Engineering. I think Daryl and I are very interested in the whether sustainability programs, sustainability courses, sustainability partnerships, perhaps with underrepresented groups and underserved communities might lead to some, say, relationships with high schools, with dual enrollment programming, with supplemental instruction on the front end, but begin to move students from underrepresented groups into higher ed successfully, but even further into STEM and even further into engineering. So we have a pre-engineering grant from NSF, and we have about 65 Native Hawaiian students who are in that programming. So we're interested in whether the relevance and context of sustainability for underserved communities, and this gets to sort of the social justice focus of this work, whether that might be a driver of more underrepresented groups, underrepresented students in our campuses and in our STEM program. So this is a very forward-looking proposal, and I think has some promise for questions around not just access of underrepresented groups, but their success in higher education.
Mm-hmm. And Daryl as well is a wonderful writer and wonderful to work with. What this project really comes to represent is the network and sharing of resources, ideas, successes, failures, and really being honest about what it is to do this work in the community colleges. One of the most interesting conversations we had during the CCASE lock-in session of all-day brainstorming on these topics was, you know, at the very end of a long day of collaborative writing and focusing on this, we started to talk about what this work means for social justice. And I think there will be a postscript to the handbook where we look at really the impact of community colleges and how all of this work can contribute to Sustainable Development Goal 17, peace, justice, and strong institutions, creating partnerships for the goals. So I think that'll be a postscript. I'm really enjoying working on this project with co-editor Francisco Acoba and all of these fantastic lead authors who are in turn reaching out to their networks and really pulling together what have we learned at the community colleges about implementing sustainability. So I want to again invite anyone who's attending the NCSE meeting in DC in January. We'll have a working session to provide input on these chapters and contribute in that way. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in my earlier remarks about Chapter 5, you know, our students will be collaborators in a rapidly developing global system. So the more they can see their courses, their lives, their research, their community service, their internships as part of a larger international concern around the UN development goals. I think those goals provide that kind of framework for our students. So although we start out with students who we really see as local community-based, part of our role is to prepare them for local, national, and global roles related to sustainability.
Wonderful. I'm so excited that Michelle Wyman, the Executive Director for National Council for Science and the Environment, was able to join us. Michelle?
Michelle, you have to unmute.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. I wanted to first thank Krista and Bob, and very specifically thank you, Ira, for hosting us and giving us the opportunity to spotlight the handbook that both Bob and Krista have been detailing. Let me first pivot, and Krista, if you could move to the next slide, please, and talk a little bit about the National Council for Science and the Environment. As an organization, our mission in many ways is even more important than in years past. The mission of NCSE is to increase and advance the use of science in environmental policy and decision making. We are a neutral 501c3 organization going into our 27th year. And we're really pleased that the Community College Alliance for Sustainability Education is a strong program within NCSE, and we're even more pleased to see how well the handbook is developing as a result of the leadership from Bob and Krista and Francisco and Stephen, Maria, and the others that we've heard about this afternoon so far. As far as the actual work of NCSE, in addition to our program CCASE, we have a strong focus on education research that spans both 2-year and 4-year institutes of higher education. I focus both on program evaluation, capturing trends and growth in things like sustainability education programs, energy education programs. As we head towards our conference that Krista mentioned in January, the theme of that being sustainable infrastructure, we are also going to be releasing a report during the conference that focuses on infrastructure education. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge also Ira's role on the Leadership Council that is planning the conference. So there's a lot of synergy, as you all can hear, between the various leadership efforts and programs and work that's being developed. As an organization, we also support and convene what we refer to as leadership communities. The Council of Environmental Deans and Directors is one of those leadership communities, and of course, CCASE is another. We are a membership organization, and for any of you listening, if you'd like to learn more about how to become a member of NCSE, which then gives you access to CCASE, access to SED, certainly we'd invite you to be a part of the handbook development process. Please contact me directly, or Bob or Ira or Krista on the line, and we'd be happy to talk with you further about how to join us. And I do encourage any of you to consider joining us at the conference, particularly if NCSE is new to you. And as Krista managed, we'll have a follow-up working group that will focus further on the handbook development. Finally, I wanted to touch briefly on the policy work that we do as an organization, keeping our mission in mind. We do work with all levels of government, state, local, and federal, and will increasingly so, with particular focus on state and local governments, and how we can create opportunities that bridge and bring together the core community of NCSE, of scientists and researchers and educators, with local and state government staff to deal with, in real time, community problems that would benefit from the value of strong data and research and analysis. And I can talk further about that during question and answer if any of you are interested. One thing that I did want to be sure we emphasize, and Krista, I believe that's one slide earlier, if you could go back up to slide 20, is the opportunity, as Bob and Krista mentioned, to submit to us case studies that really represent from your campuses sustainability work that you have been doing, whether it's on the operational side, the curriculum side, the training side. We would love to be able to spotlight those on our website. You can see the URL for that here on your screen. Our main website, www.ncseglobal.org/Community College Affiliate CCASE. And you'll see a prompt on that page that allows you to submit a case study. I will then quickly, and if you'll go down to slide 22 now, Krista, talk a little bit further about CCASE and really emphasize the opportunity that the program offers to all of you. Clearly, you can see that here from the handbook, but also, and go down one more slide, please, Krista. Also, the opportunity to engage with peers who are working in real time, shoulder to shoulder with you and each other on advancing the various aspects of sustainability and sustainability education. I believe that's all I'll share for now, Krista, so I'll pass the baton back to you and look forward to Q&A.
Thank you. Bob, do you want to make a few points about the unique role of CCASE?
Yeah, well, I think these again, I think CCASE has had a consistent focus on the 2+4 transfer partnerships. And because we're a member organization with the National Council for Science and the Environment, we do get direct access to the Council of Environmental Deans and Directors. So if you go to the NCSE global site, you'll see that the SED membership is huge, with the deans from all over, all 50 states represented there. And you might find there a 4-year campus that's in your ecosystem that you might want to contact and begin building a transfer bridge with them. So this CCASE SED partnership via NCSE, I think, is really a wonderful framework for moving this forward. We are also working with the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences, which has a summer meeting. We usually moves around sort of nice environmental areas for their conference in the summer. And then we're beginning to develop community college sustainability certificates within the liberal arts and within STEM. Again, we think that there's a close relationship between sustainability and STEM majors, particularly in the natural and life sciences. Our engineering program, for example, here focuses on re-engineering islands so that they will be girded and stronger and more resilient in the context of climate change and sea level rise and other challenges. So thinking about sustainability within your STEM programming. So there are other benefits there. I think you can see those. You get complimentary registrations to the national conference, which basically will defray the membership cost or cover the membership cost. We have biannual CCASE member meetings. Typically one of these is in DC and one is at another location. We have NCSE offers an academic federal dialogue webinar series, and then there's a meeting with federal program officials, usually at the January meeting. NCSE sends a weekly member news exchange newsletter, and a number of guides and toolkits are being developed as we discussed. I just wanted to go back quickly on the theme for the conference around infrastructure. As that theme was being developed, if you remember, both Democrats and Republicans were talking about, I think it was a $1 trillion infrastructure program from the federal government. And I think then it becomes important, and I think community colleges and our students can play a role in thinking about, well, what would Honolulu, in our case, what would we want to see in terms of infrastructure funding from a big federal program like that? So I think getting students and faculty and community partners together and talking about, well, what are the infrastructure needs of our cities and rural areas, and how would we want to get those proposals sort of in the mix as policymakers are thinking about infrastructure budgets? Do we want these to just be filling potholes or building more highways, or do we want them to be really infrastructure strengthening activities? So I think this probably still coming at us in the next few months, despite Houston and Miami and Puerto Rico and fires in the Bay Area, and federal outlays of funding through those things. There probably will be an infrastructure budget, and we should get ahead of this a bit and have a real authentic sort of civic public conversations about what we want our infrastructure to be. So I think this conference theme is really timely, and I think coming to the conference, you'll see some of the best thinkers around the infrastructure, education, business, and science.
Thank you, Bob. We can actually start that conversation right now. If there are any questions for Bob Franco, Michelle Wyman, or Ira, we have a few moments to engage with those. Ira?
So thank you, Krista, for leading the presentation. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation and throughout the presentation in the chat box, the way we do questions and comments on SEC webinars is to post your questions and comments in the chat box, and a number of them have already come through, and I will continue monitoring the chat box for those of you still on the line who want to submit them, and more are coming in now, so thank you. I'll start with some softball questions for you, Krista and Bob, and I think there are a couple here for Michelle as well. So an easy one that I would like to know myself is, when do you expect the guidebook to be available, and how do you obtain a copy? And I'll match that up with an earlier question that in part Michelle already answered in her slide, which indicated that NCSE is looking... Available. Sorry about that. Alien voice in the background. Sorry, the interest in receiving case studies by sending those into NCSE. The related question is the guidebook at a place in its development where the leaders of the process are still looking for case studies to insert into each of the draft chapters? So I'll let you, Krista, answer the question with respect to the guidebook. Is there still an opportunity for people to submit case studies to the chapters that you identified? And also, when will the resulting deliverable become available?
Thank you, Ira. That's a great question. Yes to the case studies. The case studies emerged as one of the most interesting parts of working with the handbook. So the case studies are being managed by NCSE, and Michelle shared this URL. It's like a Google form where you submit information about your case study, and then NCSE will manage those. You know, will include pictures, information about your campus. So it's basically a Google form that you can fill out. The handbook, the CCASE handbook for community colleges and sustainability is a really unique implementation guide. What's unique about it is that it is collaboratively written. If you have something to share, whether it's a case study or a lesson learned or best practice or a theoretical framework, if you have something to contribute, I would suggest reach out directly to the lead authors mentioned in this webinar or to myself, and we'll connect you with that chapter. The chapter 1 will be released in January. My idea is to release each chapter one a month starting in 2018. So in January, prior to the conference, Stephen's chapter on operations will be released, which gives our national network a chance to digest that chapter together, think about it, contribute, implement, ask questions. We can have an iterative conversation that then goes back into that chapter. The handbook will be entirely online, so it'll be an e-publication that will be, you know, really constantly updated and available. Probably you can download it as a PDF and so forth.
Yeah, let me just add that I think, you know, we're operating around sort of the Carnegie notion of the scholarship of teaching and learning. So we think it's really important that community college faculty, realizing how busy they are, have access to publication. And so the role that, say, Krista and Francisco are providing now as sort of iterative editors of this handbook, we hope that we can get more community college faculty publishing, at least in this kind of quasi-peer-reviewed environment. We think that's an area that faculty development should move. I know we're all busy. We hardly get a chance to really reflect on our pedagogy, on our thinking about moving from projects to programs. But we do really want to encourage through this handbook and through the case studies an emphasis on the scholarship of teaching and learning in the community colleges. So we hope this will be an easy, accessible format for faculty to get their ideas down on paper and to share those ideas nationally, to then put this into their dossiers and to their promotion applications and things like that. We want this to be a premier publication venue for community college scholars.
Thanks, Bob. There are a number of pretty quick basic questions to address here before we move on to a couple of the more challenging ones. So in brief, and I'm grouping various questions together that are similar, a couple of people have asked Michelle for clarification between CCASE and NCSE. Michelle, would you handle that? You unmuted.
With all of these, thank you, Ira. With all of these acronyms, particularly in the Beltway, it can be awfully confusing. But essentially, NCSE is the 501c3 nonprofit organization that holds as a program CCASE. And the handbook is a project and a product of NCSE CCASE. I don't know, I hope that makes sense. So basically, NCSE is a mothership, CCASE is a program of NCSE, and the handbook is a product and an outcome as a result of the work that we're doing through CCASE.
Thank you, Michelle. Krista, can I ask you to scroll up in your slides to the point where you start to talk about each chapter? And there are a number of people who did not take notes quickly enough and possibly didn't realize that all of these slides will be captured in the recording that will be posted. But in any event, if you could go back and just quickly, just starting with chapter 1, just go through the chapter title and who the author is so that people can just get a quick highlight reel of that. Again, I think it's worth that, especially since we have encouraged people to reach out directly to authors. And again, the contact information for these authors can be obtained directly from Krista.
Yes, absolutely. So the preface, what's unique about community colleges and sustainability with Resham. Chapter 1, operations, Stephen Summers. Chapter 2, applied learning, campus as a living learning laboratory, Maria Bocalandro. Chapter 3, curriculum, Nancy Lee Wood. Chapter 4, professional development, Stephanie Purceller. Chapter 5, assessing sustainability, Francisco Acoba. Chapter 6, institutional partnerships, Keith Baker. And Chapter 7, sustainability as a strategy for engaging underrepresented groups in higher education with Daryl Gordon. My email is Hiser, Hiser, @hawaii.edu. I'd be happy to connect anyone to these lead authors, or you can reach out to them directly.
Just one quick thing. I think, as Krista mentioned, these chapters were identified through a sort of intensive all-day meeting in Tucson last summer. Obviously, there may be other topics that are going on out there in the field, and we would encourage people who are doing important work that maybe doesn't fit within these chapters to put together at least a case study for us.
That's an excellent point.
So moving on, because we still have a few more points here to cover, and even though we're a bit past the top of the hour, we didn't have a hard stop at the top of the hour, so we'll continue a bit longer. Thank you for sticking with us. The next slide that I saw, now it's gone, on the sequence after the chapter 7, Krista, was the slide about the SDGs, a topic near and dear to my heart. And I would just, following up on a couple of comments here, if either you or Bob could reiterate why the SDGs are significant in the context of the development of this report.
I have been encountering these SDGs everywhere I go. It's really incredible the way these sustainable development goals are catalyzing partnerships, really helping people to work together around a particular goal. If you dive deeper into the sustainable development goals, there are specific measures and metrics and targets within each one. So there's something really compelling about the way they develop partnerships. I've seen curriculum being developed around the SDGs, campus community partnerships, 2-year, 4-year partnerships, many creative ways that these can be used. And I think that will also be something that comes up as the iterative chapters develop in the handbook.
A couple points. The previous UN goals were called the Millennial Goals, and they were only targeting sort of the developing world. These sustainable development goals, the new ones you're looking at now, are for everybody. They're for first world, second world, third world, northern countries, southern countries. They're for everybody. So the UN has moved from looking at the developing world as where we need to do this work to a broader perspective that every country needs to be focusing on these goals. So that's an important difference, and I think it is why we're interested in it. We have at our Kapi'olani Service Learning site, we have I think a 3 to 5 minute video there about the sustainability goals. That site is Kapi'olani Serve. I think you can Google it and you'll get to these sort of the narratives around this. It features a lot of actors and important popular figures talking about the sustainability goals as goals that are for all of our communities. I think the other part around the goals is that you can see very quickly sort of where the curricular fits might be. If you have agriculture, for example, or marine science, or you can sort of attract, I think, other faculty to the work pretty quickly as you sort of look at this and say, well, that's so-and-so teaches in that area. So I think the visibility of the way this looks is a way for you to kind of identify faculty as well as community partners you should be working with.
Thank
and
you.
I wanted to add, if I could briefly, Ira, that for the SDGs, we are also, as an organization, accredited to UN Environment, and will be attending the upcoming UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi, representing the U.S. science education community on priorities under the theme of a pollution-free planet. And I thought I'd share that. We'll be soon sending out a note to the NCSC community about potentially attending that assembly with NCSC. And I also wanted to point out to both what Krista and Bob said, the spectrum of opportunity that the SDGs frame. We actually referred specifically to SDG number 9 on industry, innovation, and infrastructure as one of the ways to help inform the upcoming conference theme. And we'll be making some strong connections during the course of the conference, and of course through the handbook, as Bob noted, back to the SDGs. I do think, Krista, you're exactly right. They are increasingly recognized as a set of guidelines and principles to align to both at the curriculum level and at the governance and leadership levels.
Just one other quick comment. A lot of presidents are talking about global learning and trying to figure out how to do global learning in the community college setting. So, I mean, if you have a president or a provost or vice chancellor who is trying to develop sort of global learning, these goals give you that opportunity very quickly. But they also enable you to connect to the local and to communities. So if you need to find places where presidents can buy into sustainability, and one area might be around global learning.
All good points relating to the SDGs. For those who've been involved with the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium over the last couple of years, you know that that was a topic that we recognized early on as fundamental for curriculum and faculty development, since it is the roadmap for sustainability for the next 15 years. We've already done a couple of webinar series on the SDGs and the broader 2030 development agenda, and all of those are found in our webinar archive. But more to the point, and this goes to a couple of comments that I wanted to raise here, which basically ask, how will CCASE be collaborating or coordinating with SCC activities? I'll take that very quickly and say this very webinar is evidence that CCASE and SCC are coordinating. Krista Hiser herself is a member of SCC's advisory council. I have been coordinating with Bob Franco, who's the incoming CCASE president, and with Steve Summers, who currently fills that role. And since CCASE is an NCSE program, Michelle Wyman have also been coordinating very closely at that level. But I brought it up in the context of the SDGs because those who've been following our game plan for this coming year, you know that we're going to be doing an online dialogue relating to the SDGs. And so it is certainly my hope that those in Bob Franco's network and Krista Hiser's network will not only participate in, but help lead the SCC dialogue on sustainable development goals. We also hope that one of our other upcoming initiatives, which is about to launch and is an outgrowth of our faculty conference in Philadelphia from June of this year, we are going to initiate a dialogue on sustainability curriculum that follows up on a session that focused on sorting content at the 100, 300, and 500 level. It occurs to me that there's plenty of expertise from within the CCASE community who ought to be involved in and helping us lead that discussion, and I am hopeful that Krista will be able to participate in one of the rotating facilitator functions as we move ahead with that activity. We're coming up to the end of the hour. I have another comment here for Bob. Someone was quite intrigued by your comment about projects to programs and is asking, how come you're not doing a chapter on projects to programs?
Well, I think the assessment chapter is that the assessment at the institutional level, chapter 5, I think it is, yeah, is an attempt to sort of, I think. Let me just answer this real quickly. I think if you're at a campus and you want to move from projects to programs, you really need to engage with your institutional research office and figure out whether they're keeping track of, and then how does sustainability programming help the college achieve its institutional objectives. I suppose I could do a chapter like that, but I think it will probably be in the assessment chapter in its final draft. But again, I think a lot of people miss the boat by not going to their institutional research office and seeing what kinds of quantitative information that office can provide on projects, and if those projects are indeed having beneficial outcomes in terms of course success or re-enrollment or whatever measure your college feels is important. You want to be able to document that so that you can go to the people who hold the purse strings and say, hey, listen, sustainability is getting this institutional objective met. We need more money for it. So I think that's really how you move from projects to programs, is you assess what you're doing, and then you go back to administration, or in our case, the state legislature, and say, listen, sustainability not only is a smart thing, it's a really good strategy for student success. Give us some more money. So I'll probably write this up under in the assessment chapter with Francisco. You can see how everything.
I smell new book content for Bob. So I am getting a signal that we do need to wrap up, and there are a couple of other very interesting questions that I'm going to pass along to the appropriate presenter. I want to give Michelle Wyman a final word here, and then we can move to closing. Michelle, are you still with us? I know Michelle needed to log off around now, so Krista, your final word?
My final word, Ira, is to thank you again for the work that Sustainability Curriculum Consortium is doing in facilitating this really nitty-gritty dialogue about curriculum and how do we actually do this and how do we do it well. It's so important that we have this faculty conversation and that we teach sustainability well. So thank you so much for facilitating and setting up these webinars, and sticking with it and bringing people together. I'm really, really grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you.
And I will return directly to you, Krista, by saying that you're one of the true faculty leaders in this space. And Bob, your support of our activities is greatly appreciated.
I want to say thank you too. I just want to put in a plug. We've just received a new 3-year grant from the Keck Foundation around Indigenous students and sustainability. So if people out there are beginning to think about some of the Native American communities in their areas, that's an area we'll be focusing on as well.
Oh no, I sense another chapter coming on. Will it ever end?
It won't, yeah.
A new contract for Krista, and we'll be sending out information on the newly formed Bob Franco fan club, so look for our next newsletter. With that, before we further deteriorate, I'm going to sign off. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.